Okay, we're just gonna give a few minutes to let people kind of start coming in. Mhm. We've hit a nice round number that I'll leave up to the imagination, so I'll say that that's good. Um, so this is our last webinar of the 2024 season. We're doing a slight revisit on our last webinar of last year, which was autism and food, with an autism, food, and nutrition sort of larger Q&A session, fireside chat. We're joined by three different panelists this year. We have my friend and colleague Niamh Mellerick, who's an OT and the Director of Operations at As I Am. Have Nicola Harris, no relation, who is a dietitian. And we have Abi Browne back from last year, who's an autistic adult. So what we're going to do is based on the questions that we received at registration, and I'm going to sort of pass questions to the different panelists. We're going to have a bit of a conversation, hoping to wrap it up around an hour 15 and have time for some questions at the end. So starting off, our largest question by far was how to add more foods to a child's diet, specifically a child, but also we got some questions about how to add foods to an adult's diet as well from autistic adults. So we will get to tips and tricks and ways of doing this, but I think first a little bit of context would be helpful. So Abi, would you be willing to tell us about uh, why introducing new foods has been difficult for you?
Yeah. So when I was a child, understanding of food and eating in autism wasn't as well understood as what it is now. So as a child, I was very often kind of forced to eat foods that I didn't like. I was made to sit at the table until I ate my dinner, whether I liked it or not. So from a child, my relationship with food was very difficult. My mum was very pushy on vegetables and fruit and nutrition, which as most parents are, and they were not foods that I wanted to eat at all. So as I got older, I managed to I controlled my diet more. I noticed that I stuck with more beige foods and they became my safe foods, which actually now only in the last few years has safe foods become a saying that I say or I use, because again, as I grew up, it wasn't a known saying. Um, and then I began to understand why I preferred them foods. And the example that I always use is mainly around fruit and vegetables, but a banana is the main one. And when you buy a banana from the shop on day one, it might be of a greenish color and not quite ripe, so they tend to be firmer when they're green. However, if you keep that banana at home for 5 days, that banana will usually turn five different shades. And each shade usually means that it will have a different texture and quite often a different taste and smell. So that then becomes a really unpredictable food for me that I have no control over and no predictability with. So actually, I used to eat bananas and I used to like them when they were a little bit firm, but I had a mushy one day and then I wouldn't eat a banana anymore. So that makes me quite anxious. And the thought of them putting that banana in my mouth actually makes me feel really nervous, and to a point where it can make me feel a bit sick, because that fear of not knowing what I'm going to get really makes me feel anxious and uncomfortable. However, if I buy a bag of crisps, it doesn't matter if I eat them crisps on day one, two, three, 4, or 5, they will always have the same texture, they will always have the same taste, and they will always have the same smell. Therefore, they become a predictable and a safe food for me, and I always know what I'm going to get, which removes that anxiety and that discomfort that I then have and that worry. And the same thing is most of the time with chips and chicken nuggets and bread. And you can see if bread's gone bad, you can see it's gone bad. So therefore, it's a safe food because no matter when I eat it, it's going to be the same as what it always is. So it offers me a lot of comfort in that.
Okay. So, Niamh, as an OT from a professional background, what might be other reasons or barriers for it being difficult for someone to add new foods to their diet? You are muted, Niamh.
Lord,
We're
it's
all trying to be so respectful of each other that we forget we're on mute.
2024 and I'm still on mute. Sorry. Yeah, what I was saying to myself and no one else there is that I would completely agree with Abi in everything that Abi said. You know, when it comes to a lot of the questions referenced beige foods, you know, I can't seem to move my child on beyond beige foods. And I think Abi has captured really well there why a child might, or an adult might want to keep on beige foods because of their predictability around texture and taste. One of the things I kind of harp on about because I think gets missed a lot is when we talk about food and eating and being autistic, it's often captured in terms of preferences and likes and dislikes. So he only likes beige foods. She doesn't like fruit, she doesn't like vegetables, as if it's kind of voluntary. Do you know that, you know, I don't like that food, or I do like that food. And I think what Abby touched upon there is that actually becomes much more around feeling safe and managing feelings of, you know, genuine significant anxiety around new foods. Rather than thinking of it as this behavior that, you know, a child or an adult is kind of opting in and opting out of depending on mood. And I think because we think of eating as a behavior, particularly when it's a child, less so when it's an adult. You know, no one thinks I'm bold if I say no to a food, but that's often what's thought of an autistic child in the classroom, which we see all too much. It totally gets missed around the idea of eating and that as a motor and a sensory skill of its own. And I think we're very, very quick to accept that an autistic child might have a difference in handwriting or in riding their bike or tying their shoelaces because of a motor difference. And for some reason, we find it really hard to apply that to the skill of eating. And we get caught on the fact that eating is instinctive. You know, she'll eat if she's hungry. Um, but actually, our main priority obviously is breathing. So if on some level that you think that, you know, you're going to struggle with swallowing a food, you're going to struggle with the texture of a food, very often on some unconscious level, you will prioritize breathing over the feeling of fullness or eating. And if I come back to the motor skill, you know, in the same way that there's so much skill required to hold a pen and then to hold on to your copybook to write, you know, we need to generalize that to think there's so much energy given to cutting your food, to carrying your food to your mouth, the hand-eye coordination of bringing your food to your mouth. And then people seem to forget that when the food enters your mouth, you know, you're still using your motor skills. So any of the foods Abby mentioned, for example, they all melt on the middle of your tongue. So a Pringle, a nugget, etc. There's very little motor skill required there. If you're going to look at something like a protein, a meat that's going to be a steak, let's say, and I often use this example of, you know, when you're on the couch and you don't notice that you look and you're like, nah, the Pringles are gone or the cookies are gone. How did it even happen? It's literally like a shock to the system. That doesn't happen when you eat a pork chop or when you eat a chicken breast. I don't often look down at the plate and think, oh my God, my steak is gone. You know, that doesn't happen because there's so much more skill involved. I'm much more actively involved in that. I'm moving the food, I'm tearing the food, I'm having to move it to each side of my mouth. You don't need to do that with a beige food like a Pringle or a Cheeto or any of the foods Abby really mentioned. So actually, if your child or you yourself also has dyspraxia or has motor differences, in the same way that they might have needed extra help with learning to write, learning to put on their jacket, whichever it was. You can also maybe take it as a given that they're going to need some extra help with learning how to chew and learning how to manage more complex foods. If you add in then postural stability as well, so you want the child to sit at the table in the same way that a child really, really struggles maybe with having to sit up straight when they're writing and they're slumping down. Again, you know yourself, if you sit on a bar stool, you much more prefer to eat something like crisps than you do a carvery, because you're having to use much more muscles. So again, if your child has any kind of postural or low tone, eating is going to be a little bit more difficult for them. And therefore, there's much more skill involved. So I think, and we'll get onto the sensory probably a little bit more, but I think probably the take home for me is, especially when you're advocating for your child, moving away from that, he likes X and Y or he doesn't like X and Y, and actually much more that this might be a physical or a sensory need of the child, and genuine barrier for them that they need extra support with.
Okay. And moving to, with that context, how to introduce new foods in a neuroaffirmative way. Nicola, do you have any, obviously you can't give a specific plan without knowing the person, but any broad strokes, ideas of how you would introduce new foods?
Yeah, Bridget, thanks a million. And just listening to Niamh there about the complexities of eating, it's a wonder we all learn the skills by a very early age. And Abi's insight from the time she was a child and the fear-inducing eating episodes. And I think that's important to remember that, like, between the ages of 14 months and 8 years, there is a natural development of neophobia, which is a fear of new foods. And some people pass through quite okay and have no problem and get over their fear of new foods, whereas other people continue on to have that fear. So if we can address, not saying we can't address the increasing variety in adulthood, but if we can address that in younger children and kind of try to minimize the rise of fear and the anxiety invoking episode of eating, we would try and do that. So I would always say to parents to try and encourage their younger children to get involved in everything to do with food, whether that's going to the shop and helping to put the things in the trolley, to select things, to look at the fruit and vegetables on display. And I'm not going to be the food police and insist on everyone having fruit and vegetables, not at all. I think kind of we have to keep an open mind. We have to be compassionate. These children, it's not that they won't, they can't. And it's our job, and as parents and as therapists, it's our job to support them and to gain their trust and to try and be compassionate along that path. So for younger children, going to the supermarket, helping putting the shopping away when they come home, helping in food prep. If they can't and they don't want to go near the food, that's absolutely fine. Help with setting the table, and bringing their plate over to the sink at the end. And also, children learn through play. If you notice a young child, they will mouth everything. They will put everything towards their mouth because that's their way of exploring. So trying to incorporate old style play, messy play, kind of pouring, using rice grains, using pasta shapes threaded on laces. All of that is really, really important for children to gain confidence. For example, it would be a safe way for a child to make a pizza. It's just a toy, but it has the element of the base and all the different vegetables that can be added on. So that's just a simple way, but that has to be on the child's terms and not on the parents' terms that they want to engage. So simple tips around meal times as well may also help parents. Abi mentioned that the meals were prolonged, that she wasn't allowed to leave the table until the food was eaten. So we tend to try and keep the meal times to as short as possible, 20 to 30 minutes max. And if the food isn't eaten, that's fine, just take it away. Because there's a risk of a child not eating, or an idea that the child might not eat their food, it's important to encourage regular meals and snacks, and to have maybe a meal and a snack scheduled every 2.5, 3 hours, so that there's eating opportunities all along the course of the day. Breakfast has been one of the more important meals because it's the break of the fast overnight. And I know there was one particular question about breakfast on the go. So breakfast on the go, if possible at all, split if you can, because obviously we don't want anyone choking on food and running around a kitchen table. But breakfast on the go could be bagels with cream cheese, bagels with peanut butter, smoothies, a breakfast burrito, maybe a wrap with a bit of scrambled egg on a sweet chili sauce. All of those things are options, as well as cereal in a little container. And there's no harm in taking dry cereal without milk if that is an option for your child. So in addition to those, it would be never give food as a reward for eating food or for any other reward. Try to offer a variety of foods. Give your child the favourite food. That's absolutely paramount that you give your child the favourite food, but include other options on that table so that they're exposed to those options. And you have to be a bit of a role model as well. You have to show them that you're prepared to eat. There's no point in you saying, oh, I'm concerned about the kids not eating fruit and veg if you don't eat it. Unfortunately, you're the role model, and they do follow your example. For there just another couple of points before you there is a method called chaining to increase the variety of foods from the safe beige foods. But 2 points before you start that. If a child is very underweight due to lack of nutritional intake, that lack of calorie will impact, and they won't have the energy, and it will impact on their physical and their mental health. They may be too tired, too fatigued, and too disengaged to want to increase the variety. They may also have diagnoses like constipation and iron deficiency anemia, and if that's not addressed, that will have an impact perhaps maybe on their cognitive ability. They won't be able to concentrate, they won't be able to engage. You might have an increase in rigidity of thinking, and we all need our cognition to be able to engage with increasing that variety. So chaining is a way of increasing the variety of foods for children and for adults. And it's based on using the foods that are safe, perceived as safe, and looking at the characteristics like the taste, the colour, the texture, the smell, the look of the food. So we look at foods, and this is all in consultation and the knowledge with the person who has difficulties in moving away from the safe food. There's nothing ever interfered with the safe food. The safe food has to be the same, because you're trying to build up a trust relation with the child and or with the young person or adult. So if, for example, we take the chicken nugget example, if you have frozen chicken nuggets, you might want to move that onto, we'll say, a different brand, or you might want to move that onto a frozen chicken strip. And from the frozen chicken strip, you might want to move on to homemade chicken strips. And from the homemade chicken strips, you might want to move on to a breaded chicken breast. And then from the breaded chicken breast, you might want to move on to strips of chicken breast that are breaded. And from that, you might want to move on to plain chicken breast. Now, in between each of those moves and changes, you might be talking about 15 to 20 or more exposures to that change in food. So this doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen over days or weeks. It can take months. So it requires a lot of commitment, requires a lot of patience, requires a lot of energy, and it requires buy-in from the person who maybe wants to change or maybe not. It's important not to force a child or a young person or an adult to try a new food if they're not willing to do it. It is never a good idea to force feed a food to a child, a young person, or an adult, because that just increases the fear and anxiety. But I hope that's a little insight into how chaining might work and to how to increase that variety.
Okay, that's great. From an autistic adult perspective, Abi, have you had any success in adding foods to your diet as an adult?
I think as an adult now, understanding my eating habits makes things a little bit easier for me. So we now have, quite often if I'm out for dinner, I'll turn around and say to somebody, what have you got? But I don't want to try it. I just want to know what they've got. And people's natural reaction quite often to say is, would you like to try it? And that's immediately anxiety inducing for me, because then I feel the pressure to try it. So what I have now is kind of nobody ever offers me to try anything in my house, kind of my family and things like that. So I have to like the smell of the food that I'm going to eat. If I don't like the smell, I will not eat it. I'm tend to always be in a safe environment, so that's home or with people, because if I eat a food that I try a new food and I don't like it, my immediate reaction is I want to spit it out. And we know socially that's not acceptable and not deemed acceptable in a lot of settings. So for me, I need to be somewhere where I'm not going to be judged or frowned upon if I need to spit that food back out. Usually I want to know everything about it. I want to know where it's come from, how it's been made, who's cooked it, and things like that. But then and it will take me a while to build up to try that food. So for example, I think there was a new brand of breaded fish bought in the house, and I was told about it, and it was cooked for me, and I didn't eat it, and it took a few weeks of it being bought, and then eventually once I'd smelt it and I'd seen it be cooked a few times and I knew what it looked like, I was then ready to try it. I didn't like it. I spat it out and I never ate it again, but I did try it. I think what's really important is if somebody does try a new food, particularly for me, and I don't like it, what will immediately do is go back to a safe food straight away. And I find that quite then kind of calming and grounding for me. One of my main safe foods is cereal. I live off of cereal a lot more than I should as an adult. But it is my safe meal. So last night I tried it. There was a new meal. I didn't like it. I didn't like the smell. It wasn't going anywhere near my mouth. So I had cereal for dinner. If I have tried something, I always tend to go back, because then that gives that control back to me, that predictability back to me. It's okay, I'm back with something that I know I like and is going to fill that hole for me. But I have managed to introduce new foods as an adult, which I really like and I'm really proud of. But there are lots that I'd still like to introduce, but I haven't had much luck with so far.
As an autistic adult myself, I know one thing that I've been trying to do recently, since I'm in a kind of safe space food-wise, is retrying foods that were complete no's for me as a child, to try and figure out if that was something that child Bridget as a child didn't like, or whether that's something that I inherently don't like. Like, I've retried pickles twice. That's a definite solid no. But even just this week, I tried soft-boiled eggs, and I hated eggs as a kid. They're fine. They're actually fine, which is great because I like egg cups, but I've never had a reason to have egg cups, and now I do. Also, I've definitely tried some of the chaining, completely sideline, but my sibling is in veterinary school, and one of their professors was talking about how you should buy more chicken thighs and chicken wings, because we buy more chicken breasts, and all chickens have 2 wings, 2 breasts, 2 thighs. So there's a lot of wastage of wings and thighs. I thought, this is very good. I make a dinner every week that has chicken breasts in it. I'll try it with chicken thighs. It was horrible texturally, couldn't do it. Ruined a safe meal for about 2 weeks. I've gone back to it. It's fine now, and I've found a way to eat chicken thighs. I make a chicken pie, which is very nice, and the texture's kind of boiled down, but it did nearly ruin the safe meal. We might move on to the next question soon, but Niamh, did you have anything to add on the end of that?
I hate chicken thighs myself.
The
Just
pie, they're not bad. They kind of squidge down.
not that I want to turn people off any foods tonight. Just to say, just one thing, 'cause I'm mindful of time, that sometimes I think, parents will say to me, "Oh, I'm working on food with him." And that's massive. And I suppose the next step I would usually have is, okay, are you working on volume? Are you working on new foods? Or are you working on a skill? I'm dyspraxic. If I'm tired in any way, I really just want it's only because I think about these things as an OT, but I find I want basket food. My dad is equally dyspraxic. The two of us would be so happy if we never had to if it was socially acceptable to eat with your hands. I hate to admit it on a webinar, but I think me and my dad would be so happy. I always look at him and I think, you want the basket food as well. And the point I'm making there is, if I like lots of different foods. If I was trying to work on something that I find hard, and you equally were making me work on knife and fork, I'd actually find that very stressful. So think about it, and I mean as an adult as well. So think about what is it that you're working on. If you are wanting to work on spoon, because you'd love that your child could feel independent with that, you know, there's probably a time to really stick with the safe foods, because you're focusing on the spoon. So why would you, if the child was learning to write, you wouldn't then put them in a stressful environment because you think, well, they're not going to be able to do that. If you are working on volume, for example, again, you might be more focused on the more familiar foods. If you're working on a new food, you're not going to be working on manners and skills at the same time. So, Abby mentioned the spitting out. Really important that a child feels safe to be able to spit something out if it doesn't taste good. So if at the same time you're encouraging them to a new food, you're also teaching them we keep our food in our mouth. We don't talk when we're eating. Manners sort of have to go out the window there. If you're So I suppose my take home point is think about at each meal, and some meals you want to be working on nothing, because I definitely as an adult don't want every meal to be a challenge in some way for me. Eating is a way to relax for me. So but if you are working on something, have a think about which it is and break down, rather than be working on food as a whole, because many aspects of the experience could be challenging for the child. Now you're on mute, Bridget.
I know, 2024, man. Um, so the second largest question that we got was something that Nicola's already touched on slightly, but making sure that someone is getting enough nutrition within a limited diet. And this is something that can cause a lot of anxiety for autistic adults and for parents of autistic children. So is there any um, tips or recommendations for how to see if someone's getting enough nutrition and how to make sure that they are getting that nutrition if they weren't previously? That's for Nicola. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Bridget. The best indication of whether somebody is well nourished or not is a combination of a few things. It would be weight, but weight isn't always a good indicator of nutrition. Malnutrition can occur in people who are underweight or overweight. Underweight indicates that a child is not getting enough energy, in addition to maybe not getting enough micronutrients. If you are kind of concerned that your child is taking under maybe 20 foods over a period of time, they have lost weight, I would definitely bring them to the GP and get them investigated for hematological and biochemical indices, just to outrule any micronutrient deficiencies that are going on. If a parent is having a difficulty in getting the volume of food increased, to increase the energy intake in order to promote growth and weight gain, the use of nutritional supplements is very beneficial, and that hopefully would only be in the short term, and they come in various shape, makes and forms. Supplements that can be added into foods, drinks, or puddings for certain ages. For adults, what we would do is try and encourage the adult to eat more frequently, so 3 meals and 3 snacks. If they have a poor appetite, then eating more frequently every 2 hours is probably more important for them. The kind of the energy dense foods are important when we're trying to gain weight, and I know there's a lot of talk of how bad sugar, butter, cream, etc. is, but sometimes they're essential to increase weight, and that is absolutely fine. I think if you're referred to a dietitian, the role of a dietitian within selective eating is to do assess the weight and height. It would also be to look at bloods if they're available. It would to look at maybe clinical and dietetic diagnosis. So what medical diagnosis do they have? What medications are they on? Are they constipated? Is there iron deficiency, anemia? Is there any other deficiencies on the basis of their dietary intake? And dietary intake is usually assessed on the basis of food diary or a recall diet history. And then we would take all that information, do an evaluation, kind of try to develop a nutrition care plan. And on the basis of the nutrition care plan, then we would implement a number of interventions and review the child or the adult and evaluate that plan on an ongoing basis.
And would there be any specific supplements that would be recommended? Obviously, you can't give a one-on-one recommendation without knowing the child, but broadly speaking, are there any that
there are
would be broadly recommended?
Sorry. So if there's nutritional supplements, the nutritional supplements are available on prescription. So they would be juice-based or milk-based. And then there are kind of pudding types that are usually for older children, young people. Then if a child is found to need micronutrient supplementation, then obviously you have to look at the various vitamin and mineral supplements that are on the market. There's probably over 100 of them available in Ireland, and I wouldn't recommend kind of one over the other because they largely all do the same job. I think the right supplement is the one that is recommended by the doctor on the basis of the blood test or by your dietitian. So whichever is age appropriate and whichever has the micronutrient that your child actually needs. So the vitamin and mineral supplements come in various forms. They come in liquid form, spray form, chewable, gummies. So wide variety. And the dosage of those should be kept in consideration of the age of the adult age of the child. And just to let you know that everyone, whether we're neurotypical, neurodivergent, doesn't really matter. We should all be taking vitamin D between Halloween and St. Patrick's Day. That was a recommendation by the FSAI, because we all tend to have very low vitamin D levels during the winter months. And vitamin D is really important for bone health. So just to prevent osteomalacia and osteoporosis, which can be quite debilitating later in life. That's a really important vitamin for everyone to take, and it's a recognised vitamin as well that will be deficient in selective eaters.
And it's clear that there's a lot of different ways that those supplements can be taken. There are a lot of different ways for people who might struggle with usual pill, but we did also get questions about pill taking. Niamh, would there be any recommendations swallowing physically wise for helping a child or an adult to take pills if they struggle?
Mute. I think that swallowing now would definitely sit more under the area of a speech and language therapist. So it would be remiss of me to comment too specifically. But I think one thing that does come through quite a lot is, you know, hiding the tablet or the so on in yogurt. And if, you know, you as an adult that works well for you, or you have a child that works well for, I think across the board, anything we say tonight, if you're thinking, well, that works fine for me or my child, then ignore us because we don't know you or your child. But I know that a lot of autistic teenagers and adults that I would speak to, and kids, will talk about the fact that because they may, you know, have a more hypersensitive response to touch or to texture. So in the same way that they might have a bigger response to having glue on their hands or paint on their hands, again, the same thing is happening in your mouth, are therefore likely to be much more maybe proficient than other kids as a strength of recognizing when something is hidden. And what we would get lots of feedback then is once a child, particularly, an autistic child who may perceive things a little bit more black and white, perceives that their food has been contaminated. So, for example, if you hide a vitamin in a safe food, it may then limit the safe food because they may feel then that that safe food is dirty or is contaminated, and you may end up losing a safe food there. And that isn't for anyone on the call who might have a non-speaking child who'd be worried that their child maybe hasn't communicated that to them and they've done something wrong. It's an age-old strategy, isn't it? To hide one thing and another. So don't, think, oh Lord, did I do something so awful? I just think that's maybe worth mentioning that probably because of that higher response to texture, probably a lot quicker to sense any sort of difference in taste or texture or smell, and maybe a little bit of a risky one to hide a supplement or a medicine, particularly with a safe food, because of the fear over losing safe foods.
I would definitely be a big advocate for not putting or hiding medication in foods. I know I've told Niamh this story a few times, but I had powdered medication hidden in yogurt when I was a child, and I have never been able to get back on the yogurt train at all. Just can't do it. It all tastes like medicine now. Um, Not that my parents did anything specifically wrong. I completely forgive them for the yogurt incident. I just haven't been able to forgive yogurt. Um, so moving back to Nicola, there can be a lot of uh, news or a lot of advertising about diets specifically targeted at autistic children or at the parents of autistic children that are supposed to help with concentration or uh, limit behaviors in some way. Specifically, detox diets come up as this idea. What is the or what is your view on the sort of evidence base behind these approaches? Or is there an evidence base behind these approaches?
No, Bridget, there's unfortunately no evidence. There have been studies, but there's very small studies. And you have to question whether the compliance was good in those studies and how they were administered. I think during the 1980s and the 1990s, there was hypothesis about the benefit of gluten and caseinate-free exclusion diets for people with autism. And that was primarily to try and reduce the characteristics of autism. Though because there's no scientific evidence to support that exclusion, it's really important to kind of not go down the road of taking gluten and caseinate out of the diet unless there's a very good reason. So gluten and caseinate are two types of protein. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, barley and rye. And caseinate is a protein found in cows, goats, sheep milk, and all the products that are made, like cheese and yogurts. So if you look at those two food groups, you would be taking out possibly two large food groups from a child or an adult's dietary intake. The gluten-free diet can be hard to be compliant with. It can be more expensive. And for a child who's a selective eater, it may be more difficult to actually accept gluten-free alternatives. So the idea of a detox diet is completely incorrect because our bodies work very hard for us every single day. We have liver, we have a set of kidneys, and we have a gut. And those organs are very, very efficient at getting rid of toxins out of our body. And so therefore, the idea that we need a detox diet is not correct.
That's it's something that I feel quite strongly about is when these things are advertised to parents who feel like they'd be willing to obviously do anything to help their child, and it feels honestly quite cruel to do that to them.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
I
It's
think
manipulation. Yeah. It's not
mm,
right.
from a perspective of looking out for these things, there's definitely the idea of checking to make sure if someone's selling you essentially a magic pill that like you have to take all of these things away from your child, and for that, I will give you a pill to replace all of these things that is 60 euro a bottle kind of deal. Or turning medical things from other situations into a uh, some sort of relief for your child, like the keto diet. My sibling who's in veterinary school is also diabetic, and ketosis is something dangerous that can happen to them.
Mhm.
And that I would be possibly told that doing this dangerous thing that happens to them on purpose to myself would help me in some way, when the keto diet, I believe, was invented for children with epilepsy.
That's correct. And it's very effective for intractable epilepsy. Yeah, it has been proven to be very beneficial. I think the point as well is that in Ireland, we do have a very high incidence of celiac disease because for centuries we had a very small gene pool. So therefore the prevalence was quite high. And I think if there is a family history of celiac disease, if your child or an adult has persistent weight loss, is feeling fatigued, has GI symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal bloating, or even random symptoms like bone pain or muscle pain, there is no harm the next time you're at the GP mentioning, is there a possibility that this could be celiac disease? The likelihood is that it may not, but at least you've given yourself peace of mind by inquiring.
Okay. So we did get quite a few questions about ARFID, and we're aware that this is a very specific topic, and there's a lot of medical nature questions around this. So this is something that we're planning to do a webinar in early in the new year. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But before we move on from it, since it might be a new word or a new idea to some people, not to come to you again, Nicola, but would you be able to give a small introduction to ARFID?
Yeah, ARFID stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And it was first recognized as an eating disorder in 2013 by the American Psychiatric Association. And this eating disorder differs from other eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia because there is no focus on weight, worries about weight or body shape. So that's the difference. The prevalence of it has been reported to be approximately 1% in adults. And for children admitted to a hospital for treatment of selective eating and eating disorders, 5 to 15%. So for diagnosis is usually done by a doctor or health professional, and the diagnosis is usually made on the basis of excessive weight loss, persistent weight loss, lack of growth in children, excessive nutritional deficiencies, over-reliance on enteral or nutritional supplements, and the inability to engage in psychosocial behavior like going to school, doing your usual activities, going to college, going to work, and also just a lack of interest in food, so very little appetite. That's assuming, of course, that that diagnosis is without the diagnosis of a long-standing psychological or medical condition that could interfere with the appetite and ability to feed. If there's no lack of food, and if we'll say if sorry, I've just gone blank there for a minute.
Okay.
And yeah, that's basically the 5 characteristics that would be a reason to kind of suspect a diagnosis of ARFID. What ARFID is, it's essentially a fear of food and a fear of engaging in eating, and that can develop a lot. There can be a lot of stress, anxiety, and worry, and there are 3 kind of difficulties. There are difficulties that arise are due to 3 different things. So it would be sensory sensibility. So kind of a person would have fear around the look or the taste or the texture or the smell of the food. Then there would be a lack of interest in food. There is no appetite. So somebody just might think it's, you know, I have no interest in eating. It's just a chore. I don't want to actually do it. And also if there is, sorry, my mind has gone completely blank. So sensory sensibilities, a loss of appetite or no interest in appetite. And there's one more. Sorry, Niamh, can you come in? Can you remember?
I can't, but we'll say it will come back to you, Nicola.
It will. But I haven't.
And it will certainly be included in the RFID webinar in the new year.
It definitely will be included in the RFID webinar. No, so sorry. Fear of, yes, a fear of food, of eating, in that there may be a vomiting or there may be a choking episode. And this may be related, just like Abi mentioned, to a previous episode that might have occurred earlier. So there are the three kind of difficulties around RFID. In Ireland, unfortunately, there is no dedicated service for the assessment or the treatment of RFID. There is no standard clinical pathway. And I suppose this is because it's a relatively new diagnosis. There's limited research done, and therefore evidence-based services aren't provided to date.
And with that being the case, where might someone go if they're worried about RFID?
I think the first protocol is always your family doctor or your pediatrician. And I think then it depends on actually what services are available in your locality and what resources are available in the locality.
Okay. We'll give Nicola a break after her nutrition and RFID questions. You could have a drink. So we also got a few questions about safe food, both with the terminology of safe food and with an idea of safe food. So just to give a bit of what and why, we've briefly touched on this, we've touched on this in passing, but a safe food is not only a food that an autistic person likes and can go back to, but it is something that is genuinely safe, that they know will be the same over and over again, that they know that they can rely on, that might even be comforting to them. I know for myself, when I'm overwhelmed or I come home from a hard day at work or I'm unwell, my husband will make me butter pasta, which is my absolute go-to. I know there's a lot of representation for the chicken nuggets, but I am a butter pasta, a butter pasta autistic. The cereal autistics are also a huge portion with Abi as a leader. Abi, would you have anything to add about what a safe food might mean to you, or can you tell us anything about the very sort of scary
Definitely a
fear of
cereal girl.
keeping
Cereal all the way over nuggets.
I've got to be a pasta girl, though.
Do you know, when somebody's sad and they eat a pot of ice cream and it makes them feel better, safe foods feel like that all the time.
Yeah.
For me, for most of us, I think it is something that brings comfort and enjoyment. And there's been quite a few times when I have stopped eating safe foods, and my mum, as most parents, got quite excited when I discovered a new safe food or a safe food. So what she did was she bulk bought it. So it would be in every cupboard in the house, and it was put in every bag of mine, and it was given to me at every mealtime, to the point where I then felt so pressured that there was so much in the house and I had to eat it all that I wouldn't eat it. And it put me off, because that safe food then actually just made me feel quite anxious again. and that I had wasted it, and I'd build myself up over a while to then say to my mum, I'm really sorry, I don't want to eat that anymore. And and then she just look at me quite disappointed that we had so much left over, because she bought it for me in the excitement that I would eat it. They are very comforting. Like you said, Bridget, when you get home and you've had a bad day, that bowl of butter pasta is amazing for you. And that bowl of cereal for me is the same for me. Safe foods are hard as well if it's not just something snacky, but like a meal, if it's been cooked different, that will quite often put me off as well. Or if I've eaten it somewhere different, that might also put me off. So that's spaghetti bolognese is always my go-to one. I like it without mushrooms in it. Many people put mushrooms in it. Therefore, I will not eat spaghetti bolognese unless it has been made at home, because it just makes me too anxious. But they bring a lot of comfort. And I have some health issues not related to my autism or my diet. And a nurse told me recently that I needed to eat a beige diet, and I quite literally skipped out of the appointment, the happiest I had been in weeks, because no medical professional had ever said to me, Abi, you need to eat a beige diet. And the joy that brought me, I think I rang my partner, my mum, my brother, everybody on the way home to tell them I have to eat a beige diet. And that's how they make me feel.
So have you had any success of like purposefully keeping a safe food, or what happens if you lose a safe food?
I think my success would mainly be like if I can get myself to eat a variety of a safe food. So like cereal again is a really good example of that. There are quite a few different cereals that I eat, which means that I can put enough variety in it to not get sick of it or fed up of it, which means that I can maintain the eating of it. And it's also one of them foods that you can get anywhere, well, most places. There's been quite a few times when I've gone off of a safe food for different reasons. Like I said, it's been overbought, the pressure's there. Somebody may have commented on me eating it, if I've eaten it out of the house or in front of somebody else. But quite often I do come back to them. There are ones that I come back to, particularly kind of snacks and comfort food. Meals I find a lot more challenging to come back to if I've lost them. I think because there's so many more components, so it's stronger smells, there's more pressure, it's a bigger portion, and things like that to come back to. And I know that's quite infuriating to people around me because my meal diet is quite limited. But yeah, I think a big one for me to be aware of is how people comment on your safe foods. And even just them being acknowledged can make me feel quite uncomfortable. I had a gingerbread man for lunch today, which is a real treat for me, but I had to eat in front of people. It made me nervous that somebody was going to comment about it being a childish biscuit, and it was decorated all Christmassy, and I was very, very paranoid. So I ate it as quick as I could before anybody noticed. So I think other people around you and is a big one for me, and how they judge you for it as well.
Yeah, I know that for a lot of people, there's this dream of going into a restaurant or a coffee shop that you go into usually, and the waiter, the person at the counter says, "Oh, you're usual." But the idea that someone would recognize that I have a usual is like skin crawling. I think another thing that's quite a big fear for autistic people and for the caregivers of autistic people is that a lot of our safe foods can be things that are processed. So they're things that are controlled by a company somewhere who doesn't know that this is your safe food. So recipes can change or products can be discontinued. I know I was talking to one of my colleagues on the info line, and her son has completely gone off one of his main sources of protein, which was McDonald's, because the buns were changed somehow and he noticed and he can't deal with the new buns. Or I have one of my current safe foods is, we were talking about this while we were planning, Tato's lentil crisps, sour cream and onion, which is something that I know is doomed. It's not gonna last. It's gonna be discontinued at some point, so I just have to love it while it's here. And if I could recommend everyone to buy potato, lentil crisps, sour cream and onion, just so it stays around for a little bit longer. They're very nice. There's this idea that some of these foods will disappear and there's nothing you can do about it is frightening. Is there anything that you found that has been helpful with dealing with a loss of, say, food that you can't control?
Trying to remove the pressure of replacing it.
Mm,
There always seems to be a lot of pressure, not just from myself, but other people around me. We'll replace it, or we'll try this, it's similar. And that makes it more stressful for me, because it's not the same. I know it's not the same. I can see it's not the same.
mm,
Um, so removing that pressure. And then sometimes what has happened is I have found an alternative myself, because that's gone back into my control and it's back to my choice and I can choose. So that helps me. But yeah, try to avoid putting a lot of pressure on replacing it if it's no longer available, because that again makes us, well, me personally, feel more stressed and anxious about it than I was about losing it in the first place.
okay. Niamh, do you have anything else to add on the topic of safe foods, keeping them, losing them, gaining them?
I'm smiling because Abby and I used to work in a school together, and our friendship group knew not to talk to Abby before she'd had her cereal in the morning because she was a much happier, nicer person. Once, and sometimes I would see SNAs approach her or whoever. Abby was an SNA as well, and I would think you shouldn't do that. She hasn't had her cereal. So yes, I remember the love of cereal quite well as someone who doesn't like cereal at all. But I think with the safe foods, there's a couple of things maybe agree with everything that's said, and actually new information for me in terms of the what Bridget said there about someone knowing what her order would be, and how that can make you feel exposed. That's actually something I haven't thought about before. So you learn even when you're on the webinar. But I think just a couple of things. Safe foods aren't always just safe for the taste and the uh, texture. So we really, when we think about food from a sensory point of view, we often just focus on taste and touch. But even from an auditory point of view, so if you're particularly auditory sensitive, the sound of, you can hear yourself chew, or you can hear the crack when you bite into something. So when you're trying to work out, maybe if your child is non-speaking or doesn't like to talk about food or so on, and you're trying to work out, I wonder why that food is safe for my child, just thinking beyond the taste or how it looks or the texture, and thinking of the other sensory differences as well. Likewise, from that motor point of view. So I used to always, nearly cry when my mum gave me chicken. And it's kind of this old story where it was like an excuse that I would say, but mom, chicken makes me so tired. And I actually look back and I think I was actually really trying to communicate that I didn't have the skill to eat chicken. It actually did exhaust me from a coordination point of view. And I remember when I'd see chicken on the plate, I would think this is so hard for me. But the only way I knew to explain it was to say that eating chicken made me tired, which of course to my mum in those days just sounded like a very good excuse rather than, a motor difference. So again, a food might be safe from a skill level for a child, not just because of how it looks or how it tastes as well. So I think there's a number of reasons why a food can be safe. I never forgot a child saying to me, sometimes I think with a safe food or a special interest of a child, going on to a slightly different topic, sometimes with autistic kids, it's often like, let's really utilize this for everything. She loves princesses, so let's get all the princess shaped cookies we can get in the world. Now, cookies might be a bad example because that's a common safe food. Let's say princess shaped broccoli, which I'm trying to imagine, and a kid said to me, I don't know why my mom keeps trying to ruin the things I like. Because again, really in that child's mind, this sat over there as a good thing, and now you're taking a bad thing and you want to mix it with my good thing, and you think because you've mixed my bad thing with my good thing, I'm going to think bad thing is a good thing. So again, it's not saying to not to try these things, but not to be perhaps surprised if that kind of logic, doesn't apply. Because actually for that child, it was actually they were talking as well about the context of schoolwork, where they found something difficult, let's say multiplication, and it was like, let's put Lord of the Rings on the page because she likes Lord of the Rings. And she was like, I still hate maths, even if you put Lord of the Rings on the page. But actually, you're making me feel a bit stressed about Lord of the Rings now because I have those things in two different categories. And likewise, again, that contamination of a safe food as well. Now, there's lots of people who will say, like Abi said, having that safe food in the background or on the plate, etc., is actually comforting because it's something to jump to. But just looking out for those cues where a child is really trying to communicate to you, you're messing with something here, and leave it alone. Because then you might end up losing the safe food in the process. And also, I think we're so final thing, I think we're so used to, you have all your reports about your kids, and it's often, like I say, sometimes with autistic teenagers, people forget hormones might change a mood. It doesn't have to be an emotional regulation difference. It might just be, hormones are playing a part. We know so many parents on the call, their children are having very difficult days in school. And it may be that they come home and they don't want to look at a safe food, and you think, is that because there's been a sensory change? Did they used to have a tactile difference that they now don't have? So I think sometimes when we learn something like this child has a sensory difference, we want to attribute it to absolutely every single thing. Where some days it could just be, I've kind of gone off it and that's it. We don't have to sort of pathologize and overcomplicate everything and think that that's another thing the child has, if that makes sense.
So this is one that came up a few times. I think I'm going to come back to Nicola. We've gotten a few questions about children who might be very good eaters or limited eaters at home, but will completely not eat at school or at the grandmother's house or out in a restaurant. Is there particular reasons for this? Is there anything that can be uh, done to help people to eat outside of the home or outside of the main place that they might feel safe eating?
I suppose the main reason that people may not want to eat outside their comfort and their safe place is in school. Maybe they're afraid if they eat and drink, they may have to use the bathroom and they don't like the smells associated with the bathroom. They also, pretty much like Abi, don't want somebody commenting on the fact that they may have, something different in their lunchbox. Or they might find it very difficult to be able to concentrate and eat because there's such a distracting smell from someone else's lunchbox across the way. Going to grandmother's houses or other relations' houses, not to label up grannies, but once I suppose it's known in a family that somebody is a fussy or a selective eater, everyone tries to help and support and kind of, oh, maybe like this or maybe like that or maybe, and the choices are overwhelming. And when things are overwhelming and there's a lot of anxiety and stress, the last thing you want to do is probably eat. Ways to get around it, I suppose, is to not put pressure on someone to eat at any given time. School, it can be difficult to get through the school day without having something to eat because usually a child's nutritional intake, about a third of it comes from their lunchtime in school. So that's quite, a lot of nutrition. So where possible, sometimes in schools, there's a strict healthy eating policy, and that can be enough to maybe put a child off bringing in their preferred foods. So there are leaflets, there are resources that explain kind of poor eating and that you can bring into a school and explain why you like your child to have their preferred foods in the lunchbox, with the reasons that they will be able to engage more, they will be able to concentrate more, and they will be able to interact more if they have their preferred foods. Things like restaurants and coffee shops, they can be busy, they can be loud, they can be very distracting, they can be off-putting by the smells, the noise. How to overcome that? I think it's sitting down with the person and finding out, are they actually motivated? Do they want to eat in a restaurant? Would they like to try a cake in a coffee shop? And if that's the case, maybe pick a very quiet time. Sometimes in Google Maps, when you Google various businesses, it comes up as quiet, it gives you the quiet times. So it might be an idea to bring them along then, and maybe to have a look at the menu online to see what's available, and maybe to have a chat about what they might want to try while they're there. If the restaurant or the coffee shop is too overwhelming, there might be a takeout option, and you might be able to take out what your preferred choice is, try it at home in your safe place, and then the next time, or maybe 10 times after that, try it in the coffee shop and then or in the restaurant, and then you feel much better about having to go to somebody's birthday party or a family celebration. Because while food is important, and it's really important for the nutritional status of people, food, when we think of all the celebrations, birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving for Bridget on Thursday, like food, we use food a huge amount to celebrate, and it's a large part of our lives, and we really want to kind of try and include everyone, but that isn't always possible. But I think you have to have buy-in from the person, and forcing them to do it, you just can't. And also just to say, there's no such thing as a bad food. There really isn't. Even if that food is processed, people need the calories, and they need the micronutrients and macronutrients. And if it's a stepping stone, or if that's a safe food, that is absolutely okay. Give yourself permission to have it, and give your child permission to have it. It's essential that they have it. And I think kind of step away from people's expectations, and don't feel guilt, and don't feel shame, and don't be embarrassed by the diet or the meal plan that you have for your child or for your young person, teen or adult. That's absolutely fine. It suits you. You feel safe. It makes you feel comfortable, and it reduces your anxiety. That's absolutely fine. If you need support from a dietetic point of view or from a medical point of view, seek it out, and we can do our best within the resources that are available to support you in that.
Abi, would you have anything to add about eating outside the home?
I think Nicola covered a lot of it. I went to a mainstream school and I was made to eat in the school hall, so I didn't really eat lunch at school either. I know what my mum used to do was she would meet me when she met me at the school gate. She would quite often have a couple of biscuits or a sugared bun with her. She would have something that was high in sugar because she knew I hadn't eaten since breakfast, which meant that I was in a foul mood and I was not ready to talk or be kind in the slightest. So as she met me, it would be a hello, eat this, and would put something really sugary in me straight away, which helped me to just kind of be able to continue functioning and get me through until I got home and had some dinner. I think one to think about for me that I find really difficult is planning to take, when I have to plan to take food out of the house with me. I find that extremely difficult. And I always say to people, I hate packed lunch. It's my least favorite meal because that's really hard. Not only where are you going to eat it? And I work in a school, and Niamh will tell you, I had to eat in the staff room, and I made myself a corner, and nobody was allowed to sit in my chair, and only I sat in that chair in a corner where I could turn my back to people and I could eat my meal as peacefully as possible without people seeing me. And then only certain people could come and sit with me and watch me eat my meal. But yeah, planning on taking food out is really difficult, especially, is it a messy food? Does it require cutlery? If it requires cutlery, how am I going to manage eating with cutlery if I might not be at a table? What about if that's not enough? Or for me, particularly when it comes to lunchtime, what happens if I've made a packed lunch and then I don't want to eat that lunch and that's not actually what I fancy? So things like that are really, really difficult. If I have kind of like a midday meeting and I go beyond my lunchtime, well, then I might not want to eat at all, and then it might cause me stress that I've missed my lunch, and then it's gone past my window as far as I'm concerned to eat. So I think it's an important one to think about the planning of eating meals out and how that works. So my lunch bag has my own cutlery in it, and I carry my own cutlery with me, and I make sure that I have everything I need to eat my meals that day when I'm at work or I'm out, and I don't rely on needing a plate or a cup or anything like that. Quite often come home about 5 Tupperware boxes because everything has gone in an individual box, so I don't have to even use a plate. But yeah, I think that's an important one to think about as well.
And Niamh, am I muted? I'm not. I'm not for once. And Niamh, would you have anything you'd like to add from an occupational therapy perspective?
Agree with the guys completely. So just some quick ones to say, adrenaline suppresses your appetite. So, if your child is in school or you're an adult yourself and you're in work and you find that environment stressful, it's in the same way when you're having an argument with someone, you don't really finish the argument and then pick up your snack. You don't. So if a child is feeling unsafe in school, or they're having to mask really heavily, or they're very worried about if they're not going to understand the next joke, it's probably quite understandable they're not raring to go to have a meal. In the same way, if I'm on my way to an interview, for example, I'm not thinking, oh, I'll have a little chocolate bar. I can barely stomach the food. So if you know that school is quite stressful for your child, or work is quite stressful for you, or going to a party, whatever it is, it's very logical that you also won't feel ready to take on a meal. I would also say, if you kind of feel my child doesn't eat outside of the house, or I find it hard to eat out of the house, recognize all the things that they are doing. So there are so many steps to before the food goes in your mouth and you swallow the food. So your child is tolerating the fact that other people are eating around them, and that's really, really perhaps difficult for them. They are, if they have their food in their lunchbox and they don't eat it, but they have to pick it up and put it back in their lunchbox, or they eat a little bit and they can't stomach anymore and they have to bring that over to the bin. They're having to feel that food, they're having to touch that food. If they do put it past their lips, and then they think, I actually can't do this, I can't stomach this, they have tried to get the food into their mouth and they haven't. So sometimes we can just think the child did eat or the child didn't eat, or I ate and I didn't eat, as if that's it, and that there isn't a huge amount more of steps. The other thing I would just say, and Nicola touched on this, just from an advocacy point of view, if your child is going to find eating at lunchtime difficult and requires having little snacks in Tupperware throughout the day, and you get told the classic line of, sure, if we let Mary do that, they'll all want to eat snacks throughout the day. Respectfully, that isn't your problem. In the same way, if a child had a physical difference, we wouldn't say, well, they'll all want to go down the ramp if we put the ramp in. That would be absolutely outrageous to say to a parent. So if your child has eating differences due to a physical difference, a sensory difference, or a communication difference, they need reasonable accommodations within school around eating, and a reasonable accommodation for them might be snacking throughout the day, might be flying in the face of the food policy of no crisps or no biscuits. And that is required for them to be able to be in the school and to access the curriculum. I know way too many children who have started school avoiding because of food, and they have a right to access the curriculum. And yes, food isn't linked to the curriculum explicitly, but if your child is unable to be in the classroom, unable to feel safe, unable to eat over the day and concentrate, then they are impacting their access to the curriculum. And do feel confident to draw from, you're probably not getting services at the moment, to draw from your diagnostic report where it will quote about the sensory differences that your child has. So you mightn't think, well, I can't go to an occupational therapist to get a letter for that. Go back to your diagnostic report and see what was written in there about sensory processing. And I'd encourage you, if you are having issues from an advocacy point of view, to contact the information line and raise that. We would get lots of queries in about a child being told they can't have an adaptation to a uniform, to a meal, etc., do feel that that's something you can reach out to us on, and don't feel that you have to lower your expectations on that, because it is a reasonable accommodation. You are not being an unreasonable or a fussy parent. And as one parent once said to me, I keep getting sent home the food pyramid. I don't get how they don't know. Obviously, if my child could eat vegetables, I would send them in with vegetables. I don't know how sending me home the food pyramid is teaching me something. We all learned that when we were 6 years old. And that can be really, really shaming for you. And just to know that, the school that Abby and I worked in, we were in a sea of beige at lunchtime. But because we were in that culture of understanding about that, there was no commentary among staff of, oh, geez, you see what's in Joseph's lunchbox? He has the chicken nuggets and the pepperami. And yes, we supported with expanding diet and so on, but we came from a place of understanding. So that judgment that's been shown towards you is saying more about that person's lack of understanding about autism, and it is saying nothing about your parenting. But I know that's very easy to say when you're receiving maybe that kind of subtle messaging or explicit messaging, and it's been linked to your parenting. So do feel free to reach out to the information line to speak that through from an advocacy point of view. We'd be very happy to help.
Niamh, we did get a few questions about eating non-food things, whether that's Play-Doh is a popular one, sand, rocks, these kinds of things. Why is this something that might happen?
Yeah.
Especially in someone who might be struggling to eat various actual foods.
Yeah, so I have parents say to me, I don't understand how he's eating the pebbles, but he's not eating my carrot that I put into his lunchbox. And I think actually a lot of non-edible items are much more predictable. So if you go back to the banana that Abby spoke about on the start of the call, to Play-Doh, Play-Doh is mass produced and has to, I don't know a lot about Play-Doh, but it must have to meet some kind of standard on how it appears and how it in the box and the color and the rest of it. So actually for a child who is really looking for predictability, even if that taste isn't particularly appealing, the fact that it is predictable and the same each time may be actually more important than whether the taste is nice. And non-edible items actually offer a lot more predictability. So the first thing I would think about is that that's really showing you a cue of really needing that predictability. Also, if we think everyone on the call, everyone on the speakers, all of us, we all have different sensory systems. And I hate kind of, one size fits all. But when it does come to sensory processing, there's probably one exception kind of one size fits all, that we all probably in some way benefit from deep pressure. So you might be thinking, my child hates touch, but we've different receptors that pick up light touch. So tickle, and the feeling of this cardigan on my neck, that's all light touch. Deep pressure, so the kind of deep pressure we get when we whack our hand and we put it into our mouth, we catch our finger, where we really squeeze and apply that pressure, generally across the board, that's quite calming. And when we think of deep pressure, we often just think of it of like a bear hug or squeezing down on our child's shoulders. But children can get that deep pressure, and adults, and that proprioceptive and that tactile input from chewing on very hard, non-edible foods that really gives that deep input into the jaw. We know if you think of younger children or children with motor differences, everything goes in the mouth. And we think, why is that gone into the mouth? So that can be another reason. If your child, actually, sorry, I'll go back first to the deep pressure. So really looking for that soothing input through the jaw. And linked to that, if a child is at that stage of development where they're picking something up, their fine motor skills aren't developed sufficiently yet to actually get much. So if I pick up this pen, to understand the contours of it, how it feels in my hand, if my fine motor skills or haptic exploration skills were underexplored, underdeveloped, I'd whack it in my mouth because I have more receptors in my mouth. It's actually very logical. You're actually able to do more discovery through your mouth. So they may not necessarily want to eat the food, but they know on some level that actually they've got more of a chance of recognizing and processing that food by using their mouth. There's lots of, when it comes back to the deep pressure, you know, a lot of the children on the call, I'm sure, use some kind of chewy, and there's different resistance for those. For an older child or an adult who thinks there's no way I'm walking around with a chewy, there is more age appropriate, I hate that term, but you know what I mean, equivalence. So whether that be jewelry, whether it's a necklace, where it's, you know, it's very common that you'll see people put something in their mouth like that, or whether it is chewy pencil toppers that go on the top of the pen or the pencil. Think of yourself when you're trying to concentrate, often the pen will go in your mouth, etc. All that's trying to give your nervous system feedback. So when you're thinking about non-edible items, we're thinking about predictability. Is it giving that deep pressure, and how else can we give that deep pressure into the jaw as well? And is it developmentally, from a fine motor point of view, they're using their mouth to explore the item, and it's actually them compensating quite cleverly for what their hands are maybe lacking in that moment. And Nicola has her hand up.
Go ahead, Nicola.
Thanks, Bridget. Sorry, Niamh. Can I just add as well that very occasionally, if it's a new behaviour, the eating of non-food items called pica, sometimes that can be related to an iron or a zinc deficiency.
Yeah, good point.
So
Actually,
that
yeah.
might need checking out if it's a new behaviour.
Okay, and the last topic I wanted to touch on before we take a few questions and call it a night is interoception, which can be missed a lot when talking about food. It might be a new word or a new idea for some people, but interoception is one of your other senses besides the five that we're broadly taught as children. Interoception is the understanding of your internal systems that are sent to your brain. So understanding when you're hungry or full or tired or rested, or even when you might be hurt and you might not notice that if you have trouble with interoception. This could also have troubles with toileting. You might not realize that you need to go to the bathroom, or you might feel like you constantly have to go to the bathroom when you don't. It's these kinds of sensations. So, Niamh, how could that difficulty with interoception, which autistic people can sometimes have, play out with eating?
Yeah, in a number of ways, and it's probably the forgotten sense, you know, it's the one that's explained the least. So I think if we just look at hyper focus first, so anyone who's on the call who's autistic ADHD, or their child might be autistic ADHD, or just autistic, and someone, if they're really in the zone with a special interest or a project that they've found their pace, and they're, you know, really just in that, and a lot of our colleagues, and as I am, will say it as well, you know, that the signals for eating will just go out the window, and they will hit 5 p.m. and they will realize they have not eaten since breakfast, because all of their thinking has gone into the task that they're focused on. And that's a massive autistic strength, that monotropic flashlight thinking, where everything else is gone, and you might be calling your child, or if it's your partner, you're talking to your partner, and it's like, you are not here, I am in the zone. So for an adult, I know different adults do different things, whether it's a reminder on their phone, or I know of one adult, for example, who they study for exams on a Saturday evening, and what they do is they will book their Deliveroo for a certain time so that it arrives, say, at 8 p.m., and that will cue them, the doorbell, the delivery arriving, or if it's their partner, so on. It's one that you almost need to apply a cognitive strategy, we would say, to. So if it's a child, maybe that's reminding the child, or saying to the teacher, you know, they will need regular reminders throughout the day to eat. If it's an older child who would not appreciate the teacher saying, you know, Jimmy, have you had your lunch today? It's thinking about how that might be cued to the child. And I would do that on the teenager's terms. So whether it's a subtle cue from their form tutor when they come back after lunchtime, or whatever it is, if it's something in their own journal, in their own phone, if they have English after lunch every day, and that there's a mark on their English book, some kind of sticker that cues them that they haven't eaten, something that doesn't draw attention to them, because I think it's, as a teenager, life is tough enough without someone, announcing in front of the class you haven't eaten. But I suppose what I'm getting there is an external cue will have to replace the fact that the internal cue isn't factoring in there. And sometimes parents will say to me, I say to him before he goes out the door, he's not to be coming back with the empty lunchbox. In the moment, the child is probably like, absolutely, mom, I will eat my lunch today. But if they're in that hyper focus zone, that's gone out the window. They're not able to think, oh, my mum said if I eat my lunch today, when I get home, I'm going to get a go on the iPad. Because they've gone into that hyper focus, and that's where rewards aren't really helpful, because that reward isn't at the front of their mind, and then they're getting home and they're feeling a sense of failure. From a more sensory point of view, if your child is more on the hypo responsive side, so when it comes to tactile, so the way you might notice that is if they don't they don't if they don't notice that their face is a little bit dirty, for example, they don't notice they've food on their face. If my cardigan was like this or halfway up around my ear, I can see myself on the screen, but I would also use my tactile cues. I feel my cardigan's not right in me, and I'd move it back. So if they're missing other tactile cues, for example, then it's likely, when you're hungry, your tummy is either, expanding or constricting, etc. All of that, whether it's a muscle or an organ, that expanding and then contracting, that is a tactile. We feel that pull or so on. So if your child has tactile differences in other ways, they might also be missing those cues. Likewise, in terms of that feeling of being too full, if they have delayed processing, it may be actually an hour later they feel really unwell because they've overeaten, but the processing of that signal is slower. So again, they may need a little bit more support. It's not gluttony, it's not greed. They may not be having that feeling of being too full till an hour later when they start to feel quite unwell. Similarly, with packing their mouth. So often parents might say to me, I keep saying to him he's too much food in his mouth. He knows well, he has the understanding to know he's going to choke if he's too much food in his mouth. In the same way that you kind of accept that there's tactile differences outside of the mouth, there's tactile differences inside of the mouth. The child might not actually, or the adult, perceive that their mouth is too full or that food is coming down the side of their mouth unless they're able to see themselves with a visual cue like a mirror. So, really, the core point of all of that is there needs to be an external to replace the internal there to compensate. And it isn't a behavior or a choice, it's a sensory difference.
Okay, so we have gone to nearly an hour and a half. So I might finish the planned questions there and take 3 or 4 questions, do you think, Niamh?
I don't think we have too many questions, so I think we might be okay. There's a quick one there on dyspraxia. Do you want me to speak to very quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, so just recommendations for best resources for dyspraxia, because we've touched on that. The Dyspraxia Foundation is probably the best place to go there. In terms of dyspraxia, it can be really, really misunderstood, and it can be kind of disregarded, and the focus can be on the autistic characteristics rather on the added complications that dyspraxia might add in. And Bridget, in the follow-up email after the webinar, we can, because I assume there's probably, if there's feeding differences, there's often dyspraxia, so it might be relevant to a lot more people. And there's an autistic OT who's dyspraxic, and her name isn't coming to my mind, but maybe we can signpost in the email there. There was also a question on a newly diagnosed teenager. I think generally, just to say, and we can send this out as well, we do have a teen resource for autistic teenagers who are Bridget and I both worked on it, and actually Abi worked on it some years ago as well. But that's available online. It's about 100 pages long and goes through every aspect of understanding autism as a teenager. Maybe your teenager would rather nothing less than you giving them a book on autism at the moment. It might be for you to read you'll be able to judge that yourself. But that's a good starting point. And we do also offer some As We Are groups for newly diagnosed teenagers who are learning about autism on our child and family support program. So I did quick fire 2 there, Bridget.
Okay. So I do have a few other questions coming in, but I do know that we've gone to an hour and a half. So I might wrap it up here. And if you have any questions, you can send them into the information line, and I will be sure to ask if Niamh or Abi or Nicola have anything to add on those cases that might come in. I will be sending out recordings tomorrow with any of the additional resources that any of the speakers tonight would like to add to that. But other than that, I think I just have to say thank you to all of the speakers who've been so helpful and wonderful tonight. And I hope everyone has a good evening. And I am going to get to my dinner.
Me too. Thanks for hosting, Bridget. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.